Good day, gentle readers. It's November 22, 2024. Here today from a desk with Ross Finlayson in Seattle, Washington, is today's Logos 2000 21st Century Foundations. Largely so far been just kind of a reading and philosophy. It's all been done before. It's all been said before. The question is how to learn that and experience it and comprehend it and relay it when it's all been said before and all been done before. Yet at the same time, it's just a tiny inkling of the infinitude of all possible things it could be. Each though an individual with their own infinity. That this is a usual point of logic, that humans are finite beings and we have limited means in a sense. Yet at the same time, each is their own. So there's lots of ways to look at that as empowering and ennobling to the human spirit and the psyche and this kind of stuff, while at the same time being humble and present in this sort of commonality that we all share these ways. So today what I thought I'd do is read a little bit more as from some of these writers, authors, philosophers that have been being considered here, and then try and get into some more of the mathematical background, the more strongly technical, which arises from these sorts of philosophies of mathematics. So I started to read Schopenhauer, this The World as Will and Representation. And so Schopenhauer is pretty famous, and he's considered a heavy hitter or a heavyweight of great strength in the analytic tradition. So we have basically two ideas: that there's idealism, and this is usually are often called Platonism. And then there's the analytic tradition, or sometimes the techno-analytic, but I kind of have my technical as ideal. The analytic tradition as with regards to much smaller, more digestible pieces vis-a-vis a thorough going ontological commitment to anything. So this includes ideas like nominalism and fictionalism and fallibilism, as with regards to correspondent and coherent and pragmatist theories of truth, which are relative in that sense, meaning not absolute. In the outlay from the outset of the analytic direction. So I started reading Schopenhauer, and he's delightful, just very witty and all over the place as well, and full and long and of an engaged mind and narrative. And then what he really reminds me of a lot is DesCartes. So both of them pick up as for cogito ergo sum after the Augustinian, no cogito ergo sum. I forget exactly what the phrase is, so with regards to some foible or something like that. That before cogito ergo sum was the thing, and it means that I think therefore I am, meaning that that I think anything that thinks is, was after the Augustinian is still much more so as like that there is predestination and fate and destiny, and it is theistic, and this is dogmatic, and this is our doctrinal too. That Descartes and Schopenhauer are so very, very much alike, except in two senses. And one of these is that Descartes frames everything in the fideistic and as of according to the language that would be considered polite in the politesse of the day. Whereas Schopenhauer, he frames all these very same things pretty much all together in a language that is at once framing it in terms of the justifiability of the analytical, and about what we can say things about and what language can address and these kinds of things, vis-a-vis concepts like creation and conservation, as kind of we read from Descartes, or the intuition of what things like mathematics. Schopenhauer still gives us, well, these are perfect ideals, of course. Now let me go on about why it's all framed in an analytic manner, and it became so much of a hero of the later analytic tradition and for the scientism and logical positivism, and as with regards to that mean a psychologism, and as with regards to these things. So Schopenhauer, though, is quite readable, and he's just very enjoyable. He is, though, kind of all over the place. Even like when I try to be all over the place and things, it's part of a holistic monism, and if a dual monism, the dually self-infraconsistent, vis-a-vis Schopenhauer making up all these examples why things are one way, and then kind of making an endpoint, then saying, whereas of course if it's not, then it's just perfectly so. And so is Descartes kind of like that as well, in a sense, because they both arrive at the perception of the intuitive. And so for Descartes, his ideals are just like, well, obviously mathematics is so. And so he definitely gives mathematics a different kind of world than the rest of science and our things, even though our study and comprehension of it is supposedly this sort of an open book that nobody's ever read. Let's take a look at Schopenhauer for a second, see something that he says. I return to our discussion of the aesthetic impressions. Subjectivity is that which each has as their own impression. And then with regards to what's kind of virtuous in a usual sense is that Kant also has this as part of his judgments. And he says, even if we're not addressing morals and ethics, or right and wrong technically either, then there's still virtues of the aesthetically pleasing. And so that's a good thing. Then both of these thinkers get into animals and souls, and whether only things that think have souls or whether things that think or feel have souls. And so it's generally kind of arrived at that at some point in time, then it was considered that the non-humans are not bereft of soul, and so it's totally immaterial with regards to good or bad what happens. It is, and so that's just one of those things that has always come around. The universal force of nature, which in physics must remain a qualitas occulta, a hidden quality. If you recall from the previous discussion, there was some mention of the hidden variables of quantum theory and why it's in continuum mechanics. And so these are the real variables that are just kind of formally unknowns. They make for the whole theory of probability and statistics. They really are a thing. So for Schopenhauer to refer to physics as a qualitas occulta, he says, just because ideological explanations have ends and the metaphysical begins. Has that here we have this kind of approach of that there is a brief, mere metaphysics, the silver thread, the shastra of the connection that's basically reflected as time or a continuum. And as regards to why then, whether for belief systems and the teleological, including the theological, that has its own world of definition, it could be just so simply. The analytic tradition has a great kind of aversion to the notion of the teleology of the that which is of some kind of combined common universal cause, or the universals, the absolutes, the ideals, and that is so to help frame things in what can be the intersubjective, meaning subjective, each a piece their own, yet intersubjective, so somehow available the same and being interobjective too. And so then as regards to the real truth of these things, Schopenhauer's just like, well, it's hidden. But he definitely still acknowledges that it always returns. And so then for something like existentialism and nihilism, and those being great placeholders to explore all the consequences of continuity, and when there is none in the theory or in the perception or in the belief, that is still the same playground of the mind, what those things are. And those are just names for the schools of thought within the analytical tradition, which are the same in the existential idealist condition. The chain of causes and effects is never interrupted by an original force to which appeal has to be made. So this is saying that what is and what will be will be. And then here we reflect that as a sum of history is sum of potentials, least action with a gradient theory. But speaking to the idea of that being kind of like a conservation law, nothing's ever created or destroyed. It just kind of changes form and is conserved everywhere. It's the idea. Or is that Aristotle said, as it was quoted a couple episodes ago, there is no unmoved mover, yet circular movement is eternal. That then these creation and destruction, besides conservation, can be seen, and it could be framed either way. And so it ends up seeing that each are framed the other way. That when physics has entropy as the tendency for everything to disorder, to reach a floor of that all organization falls away as a natural tendency, meaning that heat flows and that liquids flow and the electricity flows, and as with regards to that's just some natural tendency according to a gradient and least action, these prime principles of change in the theory, the physics. That then also as well for entropy is that anything that results some kind of propensity to organism or organization is this way of looking at it, that entropy has two meanings and they're the opposite. So Aristotle's entropy is what goes up must come down, and that Leibniz's entropy is that trees grow from the oak tree's seed becomes the oak tree. And so those are both natural definitions about entropy, and the science today we have very particularly describes it in terms of physical quantities and the second law of thermodynamics, towards that entropy always increases everywhere. So in a theory of conservation laws, then how this entropy can always increase everywhere is that it also results in sometimes when there's any matters of organization or even kind of dynamics in the formation of a dynamical system, that is as well creation and destruction to go along with conservation. Just as without it, then there's no model of change for change's sake itself at all. So that ends up being kind of simple to help describe that what's been made thoroughly simple, the abstract severe reduction of these things, to that in the dynamics, then there still needs to be put back into place these measures of what things are, for how and why they can be and how they so arrive, answering all the question words, which always have all the answers they can have. I was reading a little bit the other day about the grammar and in the Hindu metaphysics, and so back in like 800 BC in India there was this a man. His name was Panini, P-A-N-I-N-I is how it's written and translated today. Supposedly he invented grammar, and so he came up with the great idea that there are rules of speech and a technical and formal methodology to grammars of natural languages. And so that arises then to this day with regards to tongues and words and speech, that and more so fully writing and the textual, that this becomes a structured approach and very, very much so conducive to the intersubjective. Because once the word's definition is established, it will always have had at least that definition, even if it changes. It's concept. It's within a realm of concepts. So yeah, Schopenhauer has a bunch of stuff that goes on then with thoughts and the will's objectivity. And so he imagines lots of things about himself. He contemplates how he's thinking and all these kinds of things. Now, if there's a difference between Descartes and Schopenhauer, is that one thing Descartes frames a lot of things in is in terms of the deceiver or being deceived. So he'll have come up with a thought experiment is like, what if I was just invented a second ago and given deceptive memories? And so I think, therefore I am. But I not necessarily was, Descartes says. And so Schopenhauer doesn't so much have that kind of focus sometimes in terms of the negative. Schopenhauer is more like, I exist no matter what. And I might as well have always been around. And so I think that's most people's usual perception. They've been around for as long as they've been around. And vis-a-vis at the same time, at some point in time, everybody in their own philosophy has thought themselves one of these great questions like, what if I just woke up and was created at this instant? And would that be any different to all the sum of histories and sum of potentials, as were it not so? And then it kind of becomes a thing of like, well, that'd be just way too complicated. Nobody's got time for that. Yet it's still one of these things that is one of the original sorts of philosophical questions that people find themselves at as a matter of a daydream or something with regards to something to think about, to turn over in their minds with regards to then that allows all these other kinds of considerations and questions to be posed and raised. Because otherwise it's a given that there's no such alternative to these kinds of things, the system, as it were. That the idea that there's an abstract anti-thesis to all these things makes for a grounds for a ready synthesis of more things. And even just the idea of turning things over. So that's always great. About these phenomena, known by us only as a representations, ideology can never give us the desired information that leads us beyond them. This is we got science for that. And then he does a lot of talk about the a priori and the a posteriori, and here that was framed about the circulus logicus virtus, the virtual logical circle, is that logic is not just read once. The logician always reads twice. And as a matter of fact, the logician must always imagine that he's reading everything in every possible order any number of times, because otherwise there's the shifting sands or slippery slope or vicious circle that could hide itself in what seems is and may so perfectly be very straightforward reasoning about things that turn themselves around or in the wrong way. So that just goes to show that the a priori and a posteriori are very well reflected in Aristotle's prior analytics and posterior analytics, and where it's necessary to bring in Chrysippus's moods, so he establishes a temporal and modal criteria for the evaluation of syllogisms, so that it results in ex falso nihilum instead of ex falso quod lebe, so that Plotinus and later fools or frauds who buy or shield material implication, like Bertrand Russell, are prohibited from making classical logic quasi-modal. Well, of course, anybody is perfectly well in their reason to employ quasi-modal logic of the sort when entailment and modality and monotonicity, that of adding more and more facts, are always as of only an instant, according to an already fixed body of knowledge. And that there's a simple and brief derivation after that of these almost or half-true tables, quasi-modal logics, as a scratch pad that is expedient and does make for thorough and what may be correct results in what otherwise is a hazardous wasteland full of tripwires, not truth tables. That are not reversible in the sense of also monotonicity, entailment, and the modality, that it takes both the prior logic and the posterior logic, the prior analytics and the posterior analytics, a thorough reading and rereading, so Aristotle won't be made a fool. And if he is, he goes back and finds out why. That these are the kinds of things that get into when otherwise that's just kind of left in as being something that is only in a land of inductive inference. That's considered not commonsensical at all, and it's considered a specious form of reasoning. Now, I'm not going to cast too much more shade, as it were, or express my utter disregard for such matters. Yet I will. I will pretty much always feel that way. And so that said, there's ways around it, and it's just called modal logic, and relevance logic is perfectly classical too. It's just when you see somebody say classical logic and material implication and a false antecedent or a false consequent, either way being valid material implication, what that means is they took a numerical method or a brief sort of a checksum account. It's a nice way to make some checks of some things that you think might be true, in case it may be possible to show up some things that are not so. That otherwise it's not considered that has any business at all being called classical logic, and it does not have any business at all being called kind of part of logic. And again, as you can tell, that I have a totally rejecting kind of view, not of that per se, the mere idea of the quasi-modal logic for what it is, yet for what it is not, and that it's been used to make this kind of hypocritical retro thesis, which today has led to, well, some expediency has been afforded in some of the ideas is after algebraic geometry or modern mathematics or the independence of number theory from various things about infinities and continuity. In other ways, it's just been a stumbling block and a hazard. That's enough of that. Here we already see that we can never get at the inner nature of things from without. Yet at the same time, there's also the establishment here of the context that, and one thing that Schopenhauer and DesCartes both put up is like, we can never really say something about something unless we already know what we're talking about. So a lot of times people will quote Schopenhauer or Schiller or somebody, and they say, we can't say anything except what we're talking about. And it's like, well, you got to kind of say what you're talking about. And when he gets into mathematics and the whole wide concern of all the objects of mathematics, it's all in. And then with regards to things like infinity and continuity, that they are extra standard and super classical and very well explored from then till now and now till then in retrospect. And that's just part of the fuller experience with inductive inference and its strengths vis-a-vis that it cannot complete itself, and its weaknesses, as with regards to otherwise making for common sense and reason, that what Schopenhauer here is really reflecting is the need for a relevance logic, not induction absent deduction, the inference, which so many people, will take as a from they use ex falso quod lebe to establish ex falso quod lebe, which is a fallacy. The most perfect development of practical reason in the true and genuine sense of the word, the highest point to which man can attain by the mere use of his faculty of reason, and in which his difference from the animal shows itself most clearly, is the ideal. So you said ideal. And then he says it's of the Stoic sage. Now here it's established or kind of figured that Stoics included it, that was kind of like in the middle of the Roman Empire. There was a lot of reading, and it was kind of accepted that Aristotle was right, and so that then with regards to other means of reasoning these things, and as I mentioned, Plotinus, finding how easily he could convince people something thoroughly wrong with material implication is kind of invented since then, and this called quasi-modal, and that's the reason people attach it to the classical, because it was just around 200 AD, where it doesn't have anything at all to do with like the more classical. It just kind of arrives as from syllogisms and is not reflective of De Morgan's rules of logic from 1850, from Augustus De Morgan, who gave us the whole table of forward and back, inference, the contrapositive, modus ponens, modus tollens, and all such things that derive from direct causality and direct implication, which of course are perfectly sound. That then the Stoics represent a couple different things at once. So on the one hand, you can think of it as people who are really just kind of shrewd, and in a sense of like the beatific or the ascetic or the wisdom of a Stoic sage is one who is technically will not be fooled and is able to relay that. Whereas the Stoics, who and you think of the Stoic as like the Spartan, meaning the ascetic, and that which is kind of like the non-material. Whereas the whole other side of this is like all the neo-Stoics are like not Stoics. Just like neo-Hegelians might as well not be students of Hegel at all. They just take half of what he said and use it to justify all kinds of various things that are not associated nor necessarily derivative from the thorough account, a generous reading, meaning a thorough and full reading, an internalization and digestion of all the things. That the other half of the Stoics are basically pragmatists of the self-serving variety, and with much regards to the material and might makes right and this kinds of things. So when I see Schopenhauer say that this is a sign of great development, it does not mean much. And I get more out of Augustine a few hundred years after that, who after all this age of all these brutalities and the decadence of this stage of the world, the political structure and its rise and its fall, as it's often read over the course of about 500 years, that by the end of it, Augustine had pretty much enough, and he said, "Hey, there's right and wrong again, materially too, So that's a different kind of story." For the Stoic ethics is originally and essentially not a doctrine of virtue, but merely a guide to the rational life, whose end and aim is happiness through peace of mind. Virtuous conduct appears in it, so to speak, only by accident, as means, not an end. Therefore, the Stoic ethics is by its whole nature and point of view fundamentally different from the ethical systems that insist directly on virtue, such as the doctrines of the Vedas, of Plato, of Christianity, and of Kant, Immanuel Kant. The aim of Stoic ethics is happiness, pleasure principle, as Freud would say. It says in the description of the Stoa by Stobaeus, Eclogi, yet the Stoic ethics teaches that happiness is to be found with certainty only in inward calm and in peace of mind. And this again can be reached only through virtue. So now you can see that Schopenhauer is just kind of addressing these things because otherwise people will seek for their belief and meaning in terms of authorities and those which find these correspondent, coherent, pragmatist theories of truth, meaning other people believe them. And other people have means to demonstrate how they can be believable, these kinds of things. That just this section at random is like, for Schopenhauer to say that this is the most perfect of practical reason, then makes it evident why it's like his idea of the practical is, again, this pragmatic. But it's not necessarily at all to do with reason the most perfect, because reason the most perfect involves quite a thorough commitment to mathematical conscience and a mathematical conscientiousness, and never being able to deny that any object of mathematics is an object of mathematics. So for the technical philosopher who's beyond the world of mathematics as ideals and logical objects as ideals is the philosophy's realm, where it is as of ideals, has the most perfect form of ideal reason, then can be just so perfect practically as well. It can include and subsume all that. Whereas for people who just have an idea that what works is good, then that can be commonsensical without having to adopt otherwise this idea of the Stoics that you can be happy by whatever means necessary. So it's just the usual kind of thing. Maslow's hierarchy of needs is often expressed as that philosophy involves survival and the satisfaction of needs and wants, and it's a fair account of man and socialized man, and then also uncivilized and civilized man, and also animals, and also as of the machine of the economic sort, of the machine of the carrot and stick sort, and operant conditioning. That at the top of Maslow's hierarchy of needs is to be self-realized and to reach having a conscious philosophy that not everybody needs until they satisfy all their other needs. Whereas the idea of the ascetic is that somebody who's the ascetic, like an enlightened being or like the Buddha in Buddhism, has reached a point where self-realization is all they need. And they don't want it. You know? Where want means two things. Not having something or not having something. But wanting it, you know. Wanting or wanting. So, he mentions Epictetus. The wish. He says there's the hope and the wish. So those are parts of rational knowledge. They're parts of inner subjectivity. Are they really parts of reason? Well, they're not considered parts of thorough reason because thorough reason is very inclusive of all the ideas, whereas any one of these hopes and wishes is basically its own wish, its own hope. And there's a saying, it's hope and a bottle of ketchup isn't a hamburger, but at least it's hope. So then these hope and wishes are also given as ideals, and then often for the saying, be careful what you wish for. Somebody might hear it. With regards to the idea of the petitioning and this kind of thing. Here's Schopenhauer is talking a little bit about mathematical Platonism. Therefore, and I read this before, therefore we do not ask why 2 + 2 = 4, or why the equality of the angles of a triangle determines the equality of the sides, or why any given cause is followed by its effect, or why the truth of a conclusion is evident from the truth of the premises. Every explanation not leading back to such a relation of which no why can further be demanded stops at an accepted qualitas occulta, this hidden quality again. But this is also the character of every original force of nature. So it's just to be shown that Schopenhauer by no means had abandoned the teleological or that which is given as the ground truth or the truth of things. He just skips right over it. And then he talks about space relations and geometry, and he does get some interesting things about the geometry and time and space and time. Perception and this empirical intuition or perception, that these are given as what result inputs that are accepted as their stipulations, axioms in effect. In physics, we are satisfied only when the knowledge that something is thus is combined with the knowledge why it is thus. It is of no use for us to know that the mercury in the Torricellian tube stands at a height of 30 inches if we do not also know that it is kept at this height by the counterbalancing weight of the atmosphere and surface tension and gravity and a bunch of other things. But are we in mathematics to be satisfied with the qualitas occulta of the circle, that the segments of any two intersecting chords always form equal rectangles? This is of course proved by Euclid in the 35th proposition of the third book, but why it is so remains uncertain. So yeah, figuring out the geometry from first principles, it's its own kind of thing. So here there's the axiomless natural geometry after an axiomless natural deduction. And what that means is just from the very idea of a point and that being nothing at all except a thing, and the space and that being everything except not quite, is that kind of between nothing and everything, then we have this point in space. And so you got this in the physics, then this makes these regimes, the point, local, global, and total. And so the point is any point, and the local is its surrounds, and the global is what contains it and is far away, and then the total is all that all the way around. And so each is like a point to the next and a space to the previous and this kind of thing, or vice versa. And then as regards to then how something can arrive from nothing, that's another thing that arrives at this Aristotle's circular movement has no unmoved mover. And so that something can arise from nothing is addressed here quite a bit, because as part of the technical philosophy is like, well, that's all there is to start with. And it's the same way our great works start, and they say what's given. They say it's given as nothing, and then there's space, or maybe light, and then space. And so it's geometrical space, and it's also got things in it. And then in the middle of one of the much later works in this, then there's, in the beginning there was nothing, and then there was the word, and it's capitalized, it's used to represent a gift or a great great coming from the divine, and what it means though is the word, and it also means the idea of an idea that can be relayed, and that it is among us each the same thing. So this same kind of theory, and then in the very nature of it being a philosophical work, make it so that then these kinds of things for the epistemology of the fundamental question of metaphysics, as is addressed here, is by Leibniz and modern thinkers like Nozick and since time immemorial, and it is about what is above and what is below. That then the same fundamental question of metaphysics makes for geometry right after that. The fundamental metaphysical question of geometry is how can there be both a point and space? So then after that is just calling the outward spiral space-filling curve, or the vortex that comes in from the space. So the idea is that a line drawing on a plane or on a line, or any way you care to make it, is like drawing a line on a piece of paper with the tools of geometry next to you, the compass and edge, which hopefully everybody will have experienced as part of their instruction, because Euclid's Elements was the second most published book in the world for thousands of years. It's part of the instruction in geometry, and that it's part of art, and it's part of architecture, and it's part of design, and it's part of pretty much all matters of the representation of things or design in media, the compass and edge. And now it's dangerous. You shan't be running around with a compass because it's got a very sharp point. And the edge, though, doesn't mean anything sharp. It's just a straight line, like a ruler. Then the drawing of a line is exactly just like taking a point and extending it, drawing it out, pulling the line, tire, and riga. That makes this axiomless natural geometry, that the first sort of act is what results a construction of geometry that is, according to Euclid then, an element of the geometry. Because Euclid just gives, well, there's a point, and then there's another thing, and it's called a line. And any 2 points make a line. It doesn't say where you put the points, how you put the points, where the points live, or anything else about them, only that between any 2 of them is exactly one line. Now, it's similar with spaces, that you can say, well, any 3 lines that each intersect the other 2, while not being coincident in the same line, establishes a plane. Because accordingly, that through the plane is through each of the points of each of those lines, and throughout the entire course of them, and further that any other line in that plane will intersect at least 2 of those lines. So these properties arising from below then results the pieces that are given up above, and the Euclid's Elements. So this way, when Schopenhauer says, well, I don't have anything for my question where it's had to pick that up right now. Besides, it's still a little bit early to say that anything arises from nothing, because that's still entirely given to deistic dogma. That here I'm framing that in the exact same way, and as well making it so that as far as it can be so established, it's not falsifiable, that it isn't just a total gift to the reason to which we can give our voluntary submission of the ontological commitment. And that it's also so perfectly rational and reasonable that there's no reason not to make for it an ontological commitment. That the geometry this way, and the axiomless geometry, arises up as so be its own given. And so then for Schopenhauer, I'd so hope to convince him, and so at the end of his speech like that, he'd be willing to say, that's a very brief yet comprehensive way to apportion that out of this line drawing and the spiral space filling curve as a natural continuum arises geometry. And now all you need to do is kind of build things like a square and then make sure that all the things have to do with triangles, whereas geometry usually instead is like, well, now let's make some triangles, and then we're going to get into higher order polygons. It's possible to kind of make for what is a plane that then it makes a regularity in the area, because that gives quadrature in the area, basically. That a disk is kind of like, well, what's a spiral space-filling curve? Well, you remember drawing a line? You put down a pencil to paper, you move it, and then you lift a pencil, and that results a line. Well, this one is scribbling a dot. It's you make a mark, and as much as you can, just without going outside the lines, always just kind of draw outside the lines, without ever crossing, without ever going back in. Just kind of make an outward spiral space-filling curve. Well, that's just made a representation of all the things to do with all the shortest lines and all the other things to do with the facts of geometry in that piece. So this is where I kind of came up with this. I came up with this, and so I can't really point to influence saying that line drawing is a thing, but I can point to David Hilbert, who much earlier, that I found out much later, said, hey, geometry has to have a postulate of continuity somehow, because in our set theoretic account, all we really have is points, and we tend to build everything from them. So we got to have an axiom that it's complete somehow, and it's just like this line drawing, which is left besides. It's kind of a thing. And that modern mathematics today and point set topologies and the complete ordered field and this kind of thing are formalized a different way. Well, they give axioms and say, these are our elements. Euclid's got his elements. These are our elements. And what we do with our elements is make them the same. That we can say the same thing about Euclid's elements. That at some point in time, and David Hilbert at least said for sure, he's like, well, you're going to need another axiom besides the one you just added for least upper bound and measure 1.0 above set theories, Zermelo-Fraenkel set theories, axioms for descriptive set theory. So this axiomless natural deduction is also kind of an axiomless set theory. It's an axiomless part theory too, meaning that then is what becomes in the Hino theory, the fundamental primary elementarily element, the fundamental primary element of the theory is one of these elements of a theory of one relation, like parts and sets and classes and orderings, that it's the same structure that makes all of those, and arises for itself because geometry is always a given. You can just make a geometrization of it, make an arithmetization of that, make an algebraization of that. And all that is arises for then something that is never actually stipulated anything, except nothing, maybe something. So the fundamental question of metaphysics has been around for a long time, and it's pretty much always the same one. The most printed books in the world starts with it twice, and it lends it a great authoritative credence. So then he discusses some geometric considerations, the work of judgment. Want of judgment is silliness. That's how Schopenhauer defines silliness. Now, when we talk about the absurd is that zerds are forms, and so it's again one of these words that means that the common understanding of absurd means like silly or formless or absent reason. But it's right, when you say something is absurd, it's like you've detected and comprehended that is somehow absent reason. It is the reason itself. Kind of like when you have a theory of only truisms, one of which may be a lie, it's a prototype of a lie, an ex falso nihilum. Then when you have a theory of these truisms, then when a lie arrives and you can find anywhere within it a prototype example matching the what would be a lie, the liar paradox or this kind of thing, then you can say it's discovered. So anyways, you can discover truths or you can discover lies, because something that invented a lie now is when you discover something about it's the truth. So the word absurd means both silly and not silly. And then I don't know if because this is translated from German, so I'm not sure if the words silly and syllogism have anything to do with each other, because the syllogism means together, the syl, S-Y-L, the syl, And then syllogism means just logical statements together and then read them out and find something from them. That's the very form of all these things that's how Socrates proves something is true. All men are mortal. Socrates is a man. Socrates is mortal. We're still talking about him today. And the syllogism that etymologically it's not necessarily so related. And I don't believe it is, but it may be. All its proofs must refer to something perceived and hence no longer capable of truth. So here we use an object sense to perceive that if there's only a nothing and something and everything, and then they came back together and either way is the same, then it makes that there is a thing of these things. It must be all the truisms there ever could possibly be. Way, 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 way above that, somehow as a theory of elements in one relation, they all live in this theory, is the idea. So it's objective by definition, it's realist by definition. Is it justified? It's the only thing that's not unjustified by definition. So it makes for a pretty strong account of itself, a theory. And he says, as all proofs are syllogisms, that they're for matters of inference. And so all proofs are matters of causal relation. And so they can the ones in this language of the philosophy of the theory of proofs may so be as according to a sequence of statements which unconditionally arrive at a conclusion. As discussed here, that has to be turned over every which way, and that's more thoroughly a study of a syllogism is a proof, and that it may give a direct one, or at least make a good accounting of itself as a syllogism, is of course it first has to do that, and then it has to do it upside down. The axiomless natural deduction is quite a profound bit, and it's the thing. Now in this respect, the true opposite of rational knowledge, Wissen, is feeling, Gefühl, which we must therefore discuss at this point. The concept denoted by the word feeling has only a negative content, meaning that something present in consciousness is not the concept, not abstract knowledge of reason. Now, the feelings are just considered with like the currents and the tides of association of states of being with reason. So feeling and thinking are not the same, yet they are also together. And so that said, the intuition and perception that Schopenhauer says here is like, well, when there's no answer in the question, whereas this is what results is a given, has that any feeling being has that they might need not have any rational content at all, that's yet their truths. So he just established those opposites here, compared to rational and silly as opposites, or irrational and irrational, the anti-rational as opposites. That only in the true universal would something like a rational and anti-rational, like an anti-prerogative, arrive at being still its own kind of either a stopping point or a turnover of the things, the knackabout, as it were. A farmer tilling his field, turning over the clay and the soil and the grass and perhaps the burnt stubble, and arriving at one ready for a new round of arable farmland and this kind of stuff. Through all this, the question becomes more and more pressing: how certainty is to be attained, how judgments are to be established, and what knowledge and science consist. For together with language and deliberate action, we extol these as a third great advantage conferred on us by the faculty of reason. And that just gets into that intelligent actors and actions based on intelligence or advantage more widely even make for chance and these kinds of things, helping to establish, if not certainty, some level of assurance, we might usually say about it. He's got a chart here, and he's kind of got a bunch of Venn diagrams between good and evil. Let's see. mentions passion. The logical sophisms such as mentiens, velatus, cornutus, and so on. Talks about sophistication and persuasion. Callisthenes found among the Indians a finished system of logic, which he sent to his uncle Aristotle. It is easy to understand that in the dreary Middle Ages, the Aristotelian logic was bound to be extremely welcome to the argumentative spirit of the scholastics, which in the absence of real knowledge feasted only on formulas and words. So this is in the first part here has a study of some of the history, or Schopenhauer's lens of the Muslim Enlightenment, the scholastic age, what would include the medieval philosophers, Descartes, and then back to the Stoics, who he holds up as in such high regard as being explainable to everybody because it speaks to their interests, and that it's this kind of philosophical outfit speaks directly to giving people what they want, vis-a-vis what they is true. And for some people that's the same. But then Schopenhauer here has this further lens of how things are going on about it. And I'll look to read this a little bit more thoroughly later. So, well, that's been just kind of the discorso. Il discorso. Vernunft's reason comes from vernemen, which is not synonymous with hearing, but signifies the awareness of ideas communicated by words. And then he says something is unanimous, which I dispute. The unanimous opinion of all times, all these manifestations, so manifold and so far-reaching, spring from a common principle, from that special power of the mind which man possesses as distinct from the animal, which has been called Vernunft, reason, logos, or logic, ratio, res, or ratio. So that's just for matters of reciprocity, the inverse, derivation, and subsumption. These things that come together and make for implication that it is so and so and so again. Yeah, that is kind of agreeable. There's Chesterton on the St. Thomas Aquinas. He was a novelist, and then he just showed up with a biography of St. Thomas Aquinas, the Ox. He says something like Aquinas might have preferred to be among the atheists in the 19th century, or the ascetics of this 20th century, or something like that. Helping to relate that the ideas of the surrounds have that it was about the ideals of the truth of the things, and that if it was so necessary to be accepted, and I don't know if I would agree with that, or what I would make it as an estimation of the character of these men, but it goes to show that when saying that Schopenhauer is a lot like Descartes, is a lot like Descartes. And that's among the reasons why it's just kind of part of the philosophical grade, the greatness, the greats, because the times they were a-changing. But it's still the same silver thread, this teleological course of it. Now, as you may know, or I recall from some of these previous talks, I'm a huge fan of John Duns Scotus, and he gives that infinity is in, and so he's right in the same time as of Aquinas and William of Ockham, who are both about halfway there, or at least hold up one piece of reason that you're expected to know. I mean, it's not so much as like, well, I can just follow William of Ockham's deductive rule like Sherlock Holmes, and that's it. And it's not so much as like, well, I can just follow Aquinas, and he reads Aristotle, and he gives the inductive prior side of Aristotle, and that's it. It's like, yeah, you need those and then some, which John Duns Scotus quite readily assimilated and had the bravery to kind of put up and say, hey, there is it. Not much mathematics today, a little bit about geometry, like the entirety of its foundation from axiomless geometry. Here's the Dead Sea Scrolls. I'd been studying gold and burrows from the time of the 1950s when we're unearthed in the land of Jericho. There is the most ancient city of the world, and it's near this river, and it's then near to this great salt sea called the Dead Sea. And so the Qumran was 2,000 years ago. Then they had these hideouts and way stations on the road through Jericho. So they were closer to Jericho than to any other occupied area. For example, Jerusalem, or the points northwest of that in the Levantine, which should be very Hellenized and Hellenic with regards to the inhabitants of the Levant, about 0 AD to 75 AD, which of the times covered, they figure from like 150 BC or 100 BC to about 70 or 75 AD. The collection or the store or the occupation of these cliff dwellings in Jericho, the Qumranites. The Essenes, it's usually said to be, and this kind of thing. So anyways, this is a translation. Finally, in about 1994, they released all the translations that they gave of the Dead Sea Scrolls. Here's an account of the story of Samuel and the buried treasure, the Book of Secrets. Talks about, it's got another sort of account of the apocalypse, or Revelation, it's usually given as to be. Rites of passage laws, dietary laws, marriage laws, hygiene laws, rites, rules, and initiations, some histories. And these, as I'd looked through them before, and most of them are pretty much in line with kind of an ascetic or an ascetic reading of kind of the books that arrive vis-a-vis the various sects of the many involved traditions variously. That it's just a thing that I'll look to read some more at some other point. Heresy. About good farming techniques. Some hymns, psalms, and praises. Generally good. Sometimes idolatrous. Again, that these are just kind of perceptions of tracts that are historical tracts, and represent the crossroads about Jericho, one of the oldest cities of the world, and the East and West. And as from reading Schopenhauer just now, and the relations between East and West, hundreds and hundreds of years before this time, and thousands of years before this time, as with regards to all that has come around and gone around, and all the one world as we inhabit and live in, that this is an interesting snapshot of remaining accounts that yet to this day remain in their written form. A huge size of this complex. The instructions for the house, making that building the building. Sanitation laws. After, of course, the mosaic and all that kind of stuff. This is a pretty cool book. This is the nuclear radiation. The observed nuclear quadruple moments show a correlation with the magic numbers. It's first reported by T. Schmidt. To illustrate this correlation, the experimental values. So Sachs here has given some interesting, empirical data with regards to nuclear quadruple moments. Both the experimental and theoretical situations with regard to the static nuclear quadrupole moment are quite different from what we found to be the case with the magnetic moments. Great. 2 theories. The experimental values of the quadrupole moments are not very accurate, in spite of the fact that the experiments are done with high precision. The difficulty has to do with the indirect nature of the observations. They yield a value for the interaction of the nuclear quadrupole moment with the inhomogeneous electric field of the atom or molecule. Therefore, a calculated value of the inhomogeneous field goes into the determination of the moment. The main source of uncertainty is the observed moment is the uncertainty of the molecular atomic wave function, which is required to calculate this field. The theoretical determination of the wave function is very difficult indeed. Hence, there are cases for which even the sign of the quadrupole moment is in doubt. It could even be an oscillation. It could be a higher order variable hidden to perception because it's just too fast. And by the time it's observed, it's already gone all the way around. And then that's addressed here already quite a few times with regards to the super classical models of things, the continuum mechanics, and the super fluid nature of the extremes at the running constants, and that these would be the hidden variables again, which are deterministic for them. So anyways, this just goes to show that nuclear theory and electromagnetic theory and mechanics are at least 3 different theories. And here that's represented as a tetradic quantities as for a three-way interaction. Quite naturally, and as if you can imagine an axiomless natural deduction and then an axiomless geometry, then the ideas derive at those principles and the laws of physics. Furthermore, from that, hey, have a great day. Logos 2000. It's all about geometry. In theory.